My name is Clara Monroe, and I am 34 years old. For a decade, I believed my life was being built, board by board, within the walls of a little craftsman bungalow on Wisteria Lane. As a landscape designer, I see the world in terms of potential, the promise hidden beneath tangled weeds, the structure waiting to emerge from chaos. That house was my greatest project, a canvas on which I painted my future, investing not just my savings, but the very essence of my soul. I poured my belief in family and promises spoken over kitchen tables into its very foundation. Then came the evening of the heirloom china and the chilled champagne, a night where the gentle facade of my family cracked, revealing a foundation far more compromised than any I had ever encountered in my work. It was the night my parents gifted my home, the home I had nurtured from a state of near ruin into a sanctuary, to my younger sister as a wedding present. This is the story of that loss, but more importantly, it is the story of what I found in its place, a sense of self I had never realized was missing, and the quiet strength that comes from learning to draw a line in the soil of your own life. Looking back, the signs were there, subtle as the shifting of seasons. But when you are raised to be the dependable one, the sturdy oak in a family of willows, you learn to overlook the way the wind always seems to blow in one direction. The house came into our lives 10 years ago, a forgotten jewel in Port Blossom's historic Garden District. The city was still recovering from a sharp economic downturn, and my parents, Robert and Margaret, saw an opportunity. They were practical people, accountants by trade, who viewed life as a series of ledgers to be balanced. They found the three-bedroom bungalow, with its peeling paint and a garden that had surrendered to a decade of neglect, and saw only numbers. "We got it for a song," my father announced at our weekly Sunday dinner, his voice filled with the satisfaction of a shrewd deal. "We'll do some basic repairs, let the market recover, and flip it for a tidy profit." At the time, I was 24, fresh out of my landscape design program, and living in a sterile, shoebox apartment with rent that consumed nearly half my income. The bungalow, for all its flaws, called to me. I saw past the water-stained ceilings and the linoleum that curled at the edges. I saw the good bones, the graceful lines of the porch, the southern light that filtered through the grimy windows. "Let me live there," I proposed, the idea taking root in my mind with surprising speed. "I'll pay you rent. I can fix it up slowly on my own time. It would be my project. And maybe one day I could buy it from you." My parents exchanged a look, a silent calculation passing between them. My father, Robert, nodded slowly. "That makes a certain kind of sense, Clara. You can pay us a monthly rent, less than the market rate, of course, since you'll be contributing sweat equity. It could be your starter home," my mother, Margaret, added, her smile tight but, I thought, encouraging. "A good way for you to build for your future." We shook on it. A handshake, a family promise. It felt more solid than any contract. That was my first lesson in the deceptive nature of unwritten agreements. I moved in the following month, and so began my decade-long communion with the house on Wisteria Lane. The work was more extensive than I'd imagined. The plumbing groaned, the wiring was a fire hazard, and the garden was a battlefield of invasive ivy and stubborn thistle. But where others saw decay, I saw rebirth. My first paychecks went not to new clothes or nights out, but to a licensed electrician and a plumber who taught me how to patch a copper pipe. Every weekend became a ritual of labor and love. I spent 6 months stripping away layers of faded wallpaper, revealing the original plaster walls, which I painstakingly repaired and painted in shades of warm cream and soft sage. I tore out the condemned carpets myself, pulling up tack strips until my fingers were raw, and laid down reclaimed heart pine flooring that glowed with a history I felt honored to preserve. The garden was my truest passion. I spent years amending the soil, building raised beds, and planting perennials that would return year after year like old friends. I designed and built a flagstone patio, shaded by a wisteria vine I trained over a cedar pergola. That patio became my sanctuary, the place I drank my morning coffee and sketched my designs, the scent of jasmine and damp earth my constant companions. Inside, the transformation continued. Year 3, after a promotion, I gutted the kitchen. I designed it myself, maximizing the small space with clever storage, quartz countertops that looked like sea-washed stone, and appliances that hummed with quiet efficiency. My parents came for dinner after it was finished, their approval a palpable thing in the air. "You have a real gift, Clara," my father commented, running a hand over the smooth, cool countertop. "This adds significant value to the property." "A substantial amount," my mother agreed, though her eyes held a strange, appraising glint that I couldn't quite decipher at the time. I filed it away as parental pride. Over the years, I invested more than just my time. I converted the damp, dark attic into a bright, airy studio with skylights. I replaced all the drafty windows. I redesigned the main bathroom, creating a spa-like retreat with a deep soaking tub and slate tile floors. All told, my spreadsheets showed an investment of over $80,000 of my own money, not to mention the immeasurable value of my professional design skills and thousands of hours of labor. My rent, a modest sum agreed upon a decade prior, never increased. I saw this as their silent acknowledgement of our arrangement, a sign of their approval and good faith. Throughout this time, my relationship with my younger sister, Sophie, followed its familiar, well-worn path. 5 years my junior, she was the family's bright, beautiful blossom, while I was the steady, unseen root system. She had been granted a life of ease, her university education fully funded, her frequent career changes supported without question. I, on the other hand, had worked my way through school with a patchwork of scholarships and part-time jobs, a path my parents praised as character building. I never harbored true resentment. I was proud of my independence. Besides, I had the house. I was building my own life on my own terms, with the understanding that it would, one day, officially be mine. 2 years ago, Sophie met Ethan Davenport. His family's name was quietly stitched into the fabric of the city's old money, their wealth derived from shipping and logistics. Their courtship was a whirlwind, culminating in an engagement announced 6 months ago with a diamond ring that could have funded my entire kitchen renovation. The wedding planning began immediately, an ever-escalating affair of designer gowns, destination bachelor parties, and a guest list that swelled to an impossible number. My parents seemed uncharacteristically swept up in the glamour, their usual pragmatism replaced by a desire to keep pace with the Davenports. It was then that the subtle signs began to intensify. They started making unscheduled visits to the house, their compliments taking on a new, unsettling weight. "This crown molding you added is just exquisite," my mother would say, her gaze lingering a moment too long. "Are you planning to be here for the long haul?" my father asked one Saturday as I was pruning the roses. His tone was a little too casual. "Of course," I said, smiling. "We always talked about me buying it. In fact, I was hoping we could start discussing the terms soon." Yes, he said, waving a dismissive hand. "No need to rush. Family helps family." Those words, meant to be reassuring, would soon echo with a chilling irony. The invitation came via a text from my mother, "Family dinner, Friday at 7. Important news. Sophie and Ethan will be there." I arrived at my parents' sterile, modern home at precisely 7, carrying a bottle of good Chardonnay. The air inside felt different, charged with a strange energy. The dining table was laid with the heirloom china, the set reserved for Christmas and milestone anniversaries. A bottle of expensive champagne was sweating in a silver bucket. "Am I early?" I asked, noticing the empty driveway. "Sophie and Ethan are running a bit behind," my mother said, taking the wine with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "They said to go ahead." My father was jovial, pouring me a glass of wine and making small talk about a recent city council decision. It all felt like a performance, a carefully constructed prelude to an event I couldn't yet name. Sophie and Ethan arrived 30 minutes later, a flurry of apologies that didn't sound particularly apologetic. Sophie was radiant in a new silk dress, Ethan impeccably dressed in casual wear that likely cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, or what my mortgage payment would have been. Dinner was an elaborate affair, the conversation circling safely around wedding details and Ethan's latest promotion. The tension was a low hum beneath the clinking of silverware. Finally, as dessert was cleared, my father stood and popped the cork on the champagne. The soft pop sounded like a starting pistol. "We have some wonderful news to share," he announced, his face aglow. My mother stood beside him, beaming. "As you all know, Sophie and Ethan are about to embark on their new life together. And your mother, and I wanted to give them a wedding gift that is truly special, something to build their future on." My mother picked up the thread. "Family and legacy are so important. We want them to have a strong foundation." My father raised his glass, his eyes sweeping the table before landing on me. "So, we have decided to give Sophie and Ethan the house as their wedding present." The words didn't compute at first. They were just sounds, disconnected from meaning. The room seemed to tilt, the cheerful chatter fading into a dull roar in my ears. "Which house?" I asked, my voice a whisper. My father's expression was a jarring mix of patriarchal authority and deep discomfort. "Your house, of course." "Well, our house. The one on Wisteria Lane. We think it's the perfect place for them to start a family. It's in a wonderful school district," my mother added quickly, as if that explained everything. "And with all of your beautiful renovations, Clara, it's completely move-in ready." "You'll have 30 days to find a new place," my father said, his tone shifting to one of brisk finality. "That should be more than enough time." "Be happy for your sister," my mother admonished, her eyes darting to my face, no doubt registering the shock I could no longer conceal. Sophie reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her touch feeling alien. "I know this is sudden, Clara, but we are just so thrilled. We've already been talking about turning your studio into a nursery." Ethan nodded, his face a mask of practiced sympathy. "If you need any help finding an apartment, I have contacts in real estate. I'd be happy to make some calls for you." I sat frozen, the champagne flute cold and heavy in my hand. A decade of my life flashed before my eyes, sanding floors on my hands and knees, the triumphant moment I harvested the first tomato from my garden, the quiet satisfaction of reading a book on the patio I had built with my own 2 hands. "What about the money?" I finally managed, the words catching in my throat. "I've invested over $80,000 in that house. Not to mention my labor." My father waved his hand dismissively. "You've had 10 years of reduced rent, Clara. Consider it settled." "I paid you rent every single month," I corrected, a hot flush rising in my cheeks. "Below market value," my mother countered. "Consider the improvements your contribution to the family." "I can't believe this," I said, my voice trembling. "We had an agreement. I was supposed to buy the house." "Plans change, Clara," my father said, his voice firm. "This is what's best for the family now." Sophie sighed, a theatrical sound of impatience. "I knew you'd make this difficult. You've had the house for 10 years. It's my turn. Can you just be happy for me?" Ethan's condescending offer to cover my moving expenses was the final, severing blow. I carefully placed my napkin on the table and stood up. My legs felt unsteady, but my voice was clear. "I have to go." "You haven't had dessert," my mother protested, a ridiculous, surreal detail. "I've lost my appetite," I said, grabbing my purse. "And, apparently, my home." I walked out of that house, their calls to be reasonable trailing behind me like ghosts. The drive back to Wisteria Lane was a blur of hot tears and cold, nascent fury. I parked in the driveway and just stared at the house, my house, its warm light spilling out onto the garden I had so lovingly tended. It looked like a betrayal. I allowed myself 5 minutes to weep, a raw, guttural sobbing that shook my entire body. Then I wiped my eyes, took a deep, shuddering breath, and walked inside. Looking at the walls I had painted, the floors I had laid, the life I had built, a new resolve hardened within me. They expected me to crumble. They expected me to pack my boxes and disappear quietly. They had no idea who I had become within those walls. The next morning, I called in sick to work. This wasn't a problem that could be handled in the evenings or on weekends. It required my full, undivided attention. My first instinct was to unleash a torrent of rage upon my parents, but years of managing demanding clients had taught me that strategy, not emotion, wins the day. My first call was to Priya Singh, a real estate attorney whose sharp intellect I'd admired on a city planning board we'd both served on. She agreed to see me that afternoon. "Let me be clear," Priya said, her pen tapping a soft rhythm on her legal pad after I'd laid out the whole sordid tale. For 10 years, you paid rent and made substantial, documented improvements to a property based on a verbal agreement that you would one day be allowed to purchase it. Yes, I confirmed, pushing my meticulously organized folder of receipts and before and after photos across her desk. I have proof of every penny spent and every rent check cashed. Priya smiled, a small, confident curving of her lips. This is a classic case of what we call unjust enrichment. It's a legal principle that prevents one party from unfairly profiting at another's expense. They can't, in good conscience, accept the benefit of your $80,000 investment and a decade of professional-level work without compensating you, especially given the promise they made. For the first time since that dinner, a sliver of light pierced the suffocating darkness. Hope. It felt foreign and fragile, but it was there. What about my tenancy? I asked. Even without a formal lease, your consistent payment of rent establishes you as a tenant. In this state, they can evict you with 30 days' notice without just cause, and gifting the house to your other daughter doesn't qualify. I spent the next 2 days compiling every piece of evidence I could find. It was during this digital excavation that I stumbled upon something that changed the texture of the betrayal. Digging through county records online, I found that my parents had taken out a significant second mortgage on their own home 6 months prior, right around the time of Sophie's engagement. Further research into public financial indexes revealed that my father's investment firm, the one that managed his retirement portfolio, had suffered major losses in the last year. This wasn't just about favoritism. It was about desperation. They weren't just gifting my home, they were liquidating an asset to solve a financial crisis of their own making. The final, brutal confirmation came 3 days later in the form of a forwarded email. My mother, in a moment of careless haste, sent me a message meant only for my father. It was the tail end of a much longer chain. Scrolling up, my blood ran cold. The original message, from Sophie to my parents, was dated 7 months ago. What about giving us Clara's house for the wedding? Sophie had written. Ethan's parents are giving us that huge cash gift, and it'll be embarrassing if you guys just give us a toaster. Besides, she's had it forever. It's not like she has a family or needs all that space. My mother's reply was swift and damning. That's actually a brilliant idea, honey. Your father and I have been considering downsizing, and this would free up our equity. Let us think about the logistics. I printed the entire chain, the paper warm from the printer, feeling like a holy relic of their deceit. I added it to the file. I knew I needed to confront my mother, but this time on my own terms. I invited her for coffee at a busy cafe downtown, a neutral territory where emotions would have to be managed. I think you owe me an explanation, Mom, I said, my voice even. The real one. She sighed, the sound heavy with a weariness that seemed to age her before my eyes. Clara, I know you're hurt. But families are supposed to help one another. Is that why you're taking my home? To help me? Don't be so dramatic. It's our property. We have to make decisions that are best for the entire family. Including your financial situation? I asked, my gaze steady. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. I know about the second mortgage, Mom. I know Dad's retirement fund took a hit. This isn't about tradition. It's a bailout. Her face hardened. You have no right to pry into our finances. Not after everything we've done for you. What, exactly, have you done for me lately? I asked, the question hanging in the air between us. Because from where I'm sitting, you've just rendered me homeless while handing over an asset worth nearly $500,000, an asset I helped create, to my sister, who is marrying into a fortune. That's unfair, she snapped. We gave you a place to live for a decade. I paid rent for a decade, I corrected her calmly. And I added immense value to your investment. Value you are now cashing in on without so much as a thank you. She gathered her purse and stood, her face a mask of indignation. I thought you would be more understanding. You've always been so independent, Clara. Sophie, she needs this start in life more than you do. As she walked away, I saw the narrative they had constructed with perfect, heartbreaking clarity. I was the strong one, the one who didn't need help, my independence used as a justification for their neglect. Sophie was the needy one, perpetually requiring a boost, a narrative that conveniently served their own selfish ends. The isolation was profound. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about my entire life being defined by a role I had never auditioned for. 2 weeks after the dinner, with the 30-day clock ticking ominously, I hired a certified contractor, a man named David Chin, to conduct a formal assessment of the improvements. For 3 hours, he walked through the house, his expression one of growing admiration. The craftsmanship on these built-ins is impeccable, he noted in the living room. And the design of this kitchen is professional grade. His final report was staggering. Based on current material and labor costs, he concluded, showing me his preliminary figures, I'd value your improvements at approximately $98,000. And that's a conservative estimate. It doesn't even account for the overall increase in property value due to these renovations, which I'd place at 30% minimum. Armed with this, I met again with Priya. The unjust enrichment claim was solid, but she had uncovered another angle. Clara, did your parents ever register this property as a rental with the county? I blinked. I have no idea. A few keystrokes later, she looked up, a wry smile on her face. They did not. Which means for 10 years, they've likely been avoiding rental income tax while still claiming mortgage interest deductions. That's a conversation they will not want to have with the IRS. The strategy was set. We would file the unjust enrichment claim and simultaneously request an emergency injunction to halt the transfer of the property. This will get ugly, Priya warned. Lawsuits between family members are brutal. Are you sure? I'm sure, I said, a sense of calm settling over me. This stopped being about the money a long time ago. The pressure from my family mounted. My parents began showing up unannounced, walking through the house with a proprietary air that set my teeth on edge. We assume you'll be leaving the light fixtures, my father stated, eyeing the custom-designed pieces in the dining room. The most galling visit was from Sophie and Ethan, who brought their interior designer with them. They walked through my home, discussing their plans as if I were a ghost. This entire wall will have to come down, the designer said, gesturing toward the reading nook I'd built into a space under the stairs. And these garden beds are too formal. We're thinking of a much more modern, minimalist aesthetic. I stood in my kitchen, listening to them plot the erasure of my life's work, and the last vestiges of my grief hardened into pure, unadulterated resolve. 3 weeks after the dinner, with only 9 days left on their arbitrary timeline, my mother called. Your father and I would like to have a family meeting tonight, she said, her voice brittle with false cheer. To discuss the transition. Sophie and Ethan will be there. And Ethan's parents, the Davenports, would like to join as well. They were bringing in their reinforcements. The wealthy, powerful Davenports meant to intimidate me into submission. Fine, I said. I'll be there. That evening, I dressed with intention. A tailored blazer, a silk blouse, sharp trousers. I felt like a warrior girding for battle. In my leather portfolio, I carried my weapons, David Chen's report, copies of the email chain, and the draft of Priya's legal filing. The scene in my parents' living room was just as I'd pictured it. My parents on the sofa, Sophie and Ethan on the love seat, and Arthur and Eleanor Davenport seated in imposing armchairs. I was directed to a single, hard-backed chair placed opposite them all, as if I were a defendant at my own hearing. Clara, my father began, clearing his throat. We wanted to discuss the logistics of your move. Sophie and Ethan are hoping to have contractors begin work as soon as possible. I let him finish, then took a deep breath and opened my portfolio. Before we discuss my departure, I said, my voice clear and steady, I believe we need to discuss some legal matters. The room fell silent. Legal matters, my father repeated, his face clouding over. I laid out David's assessment, handing copies to my father and to a surprised-looking Arthur Davenport. This is a professional evaluation of my improvements, valued at $98,000. I then produced the email chain. And this is documentation of your premeditated plan to appropriate my home to solve your financial difficulties, in direct violation of our long-standing verbal agreement. My mother gasped. You've been investigating us. I've been protecting myself, I countered. You would see your own family, my father bellowed, rising to his feet. You would steal my home and $100,000 of my investment? I retorted, remaining seated. I can't believe you're ruining my wedding. Sophie began to cry, right on cue. But it was Arthur Davenport's reaction that shifted the dynamic. He was studying the contractor's report, his expression not angry, but intrigued. These are extensive improvements, he said, looking at me. You did this work yourself? I'm a landscape designer, I said. I designed it all and did much of the labor. He nodded, then turned to my father. Robert, what were the terms of compensation for this equity Clara built? My father stammered. Well, the reduced rent. It was then that Sophie, in a fit of pique and frustration, delivered the final, devastating truth. Oh, stop it, she shrieked, her face red and blotchy. I never even wanted that stupid house. It was your idea. You said it would solve everything. You could help pay for the wedding, and you could finally put Clara in her place. The room went utterly still. Put me in my place? I repeated softly. Yes, Sophie sobbed. You said she's always so superior with her career and her independence, and it was time she learned that family comes first. You said giving me the house would remind her she's not that special. The full, ugly truth was finally laid bare. My mother buried her face in her hands. My father stared at Sophie, his expression one of pure shock. Arthur Davenport cleared his throat. I believe my wife and I will wait outside. I gathered my papers and stood. I'll be filing the injunction tomorrow morning, I said into the silent, shattered room. My attorney will be in touch. I walked out, feeling a strange, hollow calm. The truth was out. And, in its own terrible way, it was liberating. The injunction was granted, halting everything. The court date was set for 6 weeks later. The fallout was immediate. My father's texts were clipped and furious. But then, an unexpected call came. It was my grandmother Beatrice, my father's mother, calling from her home in Arizona. I've heard your father's version of this mess, she said, her voice raspy but strong. Now, I want to hear yours. After I told her everything, she was silent for a long moment. Clara, she said finally, there's something your father never told you. That house, it was purchased with money from your grandfather's estate. He left a specific fund to be used to help both of his granddaughters, you and Sophie, secure your first homes. Half of that house was, morally and legally, meant for you from the very beginning. The floor dropped out from under me. Within a day, she had emailed me the trust documents. It was all there in black and white. My father had not just been a parent, he had been a fiduciary, and he had breached that sacred trust. This new evidence changed everything. A week before the court date, my parents' attorney called, requesting a settlement meeting. Faced with irrefutable proof of not just unjust enrichment, but a breach of fiduciary duty, they folded. The final agreement was not a victory lap, but a somber accounting. They would pay me $120,000, a figure representing my grandfather's original bequest adjusted for inflation, plus a portion of my improvement costs. We'll have to sell our house now to cover this, my father said, his voice laced with bitterness as he signed the papers. You should have thought of that before you tried to give away my inheritance, I replied, feeling only a deep, profound sadness. Sophie's wedding went on, though it was a much smaller, less extravagant affair. I was not invited. The house on Wisteria Lane was sold to a neutral third party. 2 months later, I received a text from Sophie. Can we talk? We met at a coffee shop. She looked tired, the bridal glow completely gone. I wanted to apologize, she said, staring into her latte. Ethan, he was appalled by it all. He said his family would never treat siblings that way. It's made me look at everything differently. At them. At myself. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a crack of light in a dark room. With the settlement money, I found my own place. A smaller craftsman bungalow in need of love, but its deed was firmly and unequivocally in my name. As I began the familiar, joyful work of sanding floors and planting a garden, I realized the most profound truth. For 10 years, I had poured my heart into a house, believing it was my foundation. But a foundation built on someone else's land on their terms is no foundation at all. My new home is smaller, the garden less grand, but every nail I drive, Every seed I plant is an affirmation of my own worth. I lost a house, but I found myself. I learned that true family isn't about blood or obligation, but about mutual respect and unwavering support. It's about the people who help you build your own foundation, not the ones who try to pull it out from under you. Sometimes, the most important boundaries we draw are with the very people who taught us we shouldn't have any. And in the quiet sanctuary of my own home, a home built not on promises, but on my own strength, I am finally, peacefully at peace.